what a blessing that this Gazeley fellowship has been for all these years. I believe it's made a great impact around Great Britain and beyond Great Britain. And God has his faithful people all around. And we're thankful to God for what is taking place. And I hope it will continue and even strengthen. I've been pleased with the number of people here today. I expected about half the number from what I understood than that has come. And that's a blessing to me and an encouragement to me. And I hope you'll never give it up. And if leadership pulled out, someone will take the place. Won't let it drop. So important. And the younger generation will have to take up. Unless the finishing of the gospel takes place. Well, to introduce my topic this afternoon, open to Matthew chapter 24, a very familiar chapter to us. You will notice as we look at the beginning of chapter 24, and here the disciples and Jesus had been in the courthouse of the temple. Now, which temple was this one? Well, it was in Jerusalem. This was Herod's temple. I suppose most of us understand that after Solomon's temple, when it was destroyed, eventually there was a rebuilding of a temple. You remember there were going to be 3 kings, and the third king, it would be built by the Medo-Persians, or they were going to allow it to be. And at the time, Nehemiah was serving the king, Artaxerxes, the third of those. There was Cyrus, Desirus, or Darius, as some say, different pronunciations, and Artaxerxes. And Nehemiah was serving King Artaxerxes. And one day he was terribly cast down. And the king and the queen wanted to know why he was so cast down. And he said, because we haven't rebuilt the temple. And the king responded and gave him leave to go and do something about it. This was a favourable king to do that. And he had shown the king what the prophecy was. And so it went ahead. However, when it was completed, by the way, what name was that temple? Well, no, that wasn't Herod's. Zerubbabel. He was the man who superintended over the second temple. But when it was completed, many of the old Jews were weeping. Why were they weeping? It had nothing like the splendor of the temple. And that the first temple, Solomon's temple. Well, over the hundreds of years, it had gone into disrepair and had been repaired and so on, and it was getting older, and a new Herod came in. There's so many Herods at that time, but became a ruler over the Jews. Now, this Herod knew very well the Jews were very difficult to govern. Not easy. He'd been given by the Caesar a very difficult task to take over the Jewish nation, because it was now conquered, of course, by the Romans. And so he decided he would do something to ingratiate himself to the Jews so that he'd have much easier time in trying to rule over them. And so he called the Jewish leaders to tell him that he was going to build for them a new temple. And they refused. They didn't have any confidence he would pull down the temple and then he wouldn't let another one to be built. But that wasn't the thought of this Herod. And eventually, what he did was get all the materials that were necessary for the building of that temple, or almost everything, and then the Jews gave him permission that the temple would be built. And it was a beautiful temple, much more beautiful than the temple of Zerubbabel. A beautiful gold and silver and all sorts of wonderful thing. It must have cost a huge amount of money. But the Jews were very happy with it. Remember, when Jesus was born, that temple was in process. Zerubbabel's temple was still there, hadn't been taken down. That's where Jesus went to. But during the growing up of Jesus, the new temple, Herod's temple, was completed. And so it was still very new. And you'll notice in chapter 24, verse 1, and said, gets going out of the temple, and said, and Jesus went out and departed from the temple. And his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. They were so proud of it, this new temple. And Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily, I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Oh, that was a sad statement that Jesus made in prophecy, that this temple would be thrown down, destroyed. This beautiful, wonderful temple. Well, in verse 3, as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, you see, they'd gone up and they could go up and they could look down over the temple from the Olivet. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world? Now they put it together, the end of the world and the temple. They thought surely it would last until the coming of Jesus. Now Jesus didn't stop to talk to them of the two events. He combined them together. Verse 4, and Jesus answered their question and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you. The first sign of the coming of Jesus is deception. Is there deception in the world today? Is it in the Seventh-day Adventist Church? You see. Going to be deception. And that was the first sign of his coming. So we should not be surprised that there's so much deception in the world and in God's chosen church. Because that's what Jesus said there. We shouldn't be surprised, but we should be very sad about it. And seek every way to take the truth to members of the church and the world. That's our responsibility. Verse 5, he went on to say, "For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many." Well, we've had plenty of so-called Christ coming, or those claiming to be God. And in verse 6, "And ye shall hear of wars." Any wars today? Have you ever thought of why the World Council of Churches got the impetus to be established? They weren't good students of the Bible. If you go back to the later part of the 19th century, there was a lot of getting together of certain churches, and they were saying, look, if we get the churches all together, especially in Europe, they were talking about, all the wars in Europe were so great over those years, and they said, that will end wars. We'll get all the churches into one church, in one body, you see, and then we'll stop wars. Well, they were talking about, but then came the First World War. So that stopped progress of any dialogue. And the same peoples were in it, you know, Britain was in it, and France, and in Germany, and on and on and on, that were in part of the First World War. Well, soon after the peace that ended the First World War, they quickly got together again to get the architecture that is necessary for the world churches, of course. And but before they could even get together on it, the Second World War burst out. Some of us here went through it. How many remember the Second World War? I mean, not just reading it in history, but remember it. And you know how this country was bombed, and many other countries of the world. And so now, at the end of that, they got into top gear. We've got to call all these churches together. And if we get them in one body, that will stop war. You see, they didn't read the Bible. There'll be wars and rumours of wars. But that was the impetus to build the World Council of Churches. Well, it hasn't stopped wars, has it? And he said, there will be wars and rumours of wars. See that ye be not troubled. And then in verse 7, Jesus said, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines. Are there any famines today? I was reading an article about a year ago in which they said there's approximately 1 billion people that are at starvation level in the world. That's huge. That's 1 in every 7 person on the planet, if that was accurate. They didn't just say that poor or on poor food, said famine level. There's going to be famines. Yes. And pestilences or diseases. They're our wonder drugs. What about them? Haven't we overcome them? I remember when they thought that they'd soon be able to get all the major diseases under control or even expelled from the earth. But what happened? They got superbugs. There's plenty of pestilences today. And it says earthquakes. Any earthquakes? I knew that Australia didn't have any earthquakes. Not one tremor was ever reported from 1788, when the first fleet of the convicts were taken out to Sydney Cove, until that time. No earthquakes. Yes, there's plenty of earthquakes around the world, but nothing in Australia. But 20-some years ago, the first earthquake in Australia. And would you believe it? It was in my home city of Newcastle. Now it was a 5.6, wasn't one of these big 7 points or 8s or something. But none of the buildings in Newcastle were built for earthquakes. And quite a few buildings came down, and 12 people were killed in that earthquake. And 6 of them were killed about 200 metres from where I was born. That's how close were those 6 people died. And and it was about half a mile from where I lived till I went to Avondale College. That's how close it was to where I lived, if it had come then. Although I don't think it would have destroyed the old wooden house that we're in. The brick were more dangerous. But wars and rumours of wars, and now pestilence, and now earthquakes in diverse places, different places, unusual places. We can't stop earthquakes. Is there a year that I can remember where there haven't been earthquakes in some part of the world? And then it goes on to say, all these are the beginning of sorrow, not the end of sorrow. Well, and we can put our concentration on all these tragedies that are going on in the world, but that's not the focus that we should have. We should be concerned about it, help the needy and those that are in destitution and so on. But if we go back to verse 6, the last part of verse 6, it says, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. We can have all these disasters and so on, but the end is not yet. That's not going to tell us we're at the end. But Jesus did tell us when it would come. Look at it in a text that we know so well. Verse 14. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. It's got nothing to do with these destructions. They're just warnings that the end's going to come. But that's not what brings the end of this world. It is when the gospel, the everlasting gospel, is taken to every nation of the world. I hope there's someone here that's going to take up one of those nations. Or a group of people will go to some of these, whether they're in, so easily to go down to the Mediterranean, for example, from here, or it could be anywhere else, like the Falkland Islands, which is still British by its standards today, after the war, of course, that was with Argentina over it. And God tells us the only way Jesus will return until all nations will have heard the everlasting gospel. Why aren't we concentrating on it? Why isn't every Seventh-day Adventist focusing on these situations? Why are we so passive, letting others to do it? Let the ministers do it, or let the conferences have that responsibility. Every Seventh-day Adventist has a responsibility, an individual responsibility. If everyone in the world didn't do it, we would do it. Should be. God's looking for men and women, groups, families, to take the gospel to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. And that's been a passion for me to go to some of these nations of the world, and some of them with very few Seventh-day Adventists in them. In the last couple of years, I have had many visits to South America. Not because they are not people in those countries that are Seventh-day Adventists, but I knew there were groups there that were isolated or in an area where virtually there was no Adventist group or a very small group of Adventists. So last year I started in Argentina. I'd had pressure for some of the people in Argentina for me to come down there. I'd never but once and very shortly been in Argentina. And it was to the city of Iberá. It's a city of around about 90,000 to 100,000. Sizable city, but not a giant city. But there was a little self-supporting place outside Iberá, in the outskirts, in the forest, and they had gardens and so on, and they were working in, and they were looking for more help. So we decided to come. Well, one of the men, in fact, one of the top leader of that little group of self-supporting workers, he was in a very excellent role in the city as a self-supporting worker. And he was very much respected by the mayor of the city. Now, Abira is strongly German Baptist, not Lutheran, but German Baptist. They'd come out earlier fleeing from Germany because they were being persecuted there. And there's a lot of those communities in parts of Argentina. And the mayor of the city was a member of Abira, was a German Baptist. And so this worker with the mayor told about us coming. We needed to have a place to preach, and we needed to have some way to advertise and so on. So that mayor, because of this faithful, self-supporting worker that he found to be very reliable in his, we'd call a cabinet or something like that. And so this mayor, he decided to advertise it on the television personally, our meeting, and also on the radio. The mayor himself went in urging people to come. And he decided to give us a city hall, a beautiful city hall, by the way, a sizable one, that we would have it free of charge to run these nights, 10 nights. And he sent his chauffeur 2 hours to pick us up at the airport. I've never had that situation in my life before. And he was there for the opening night, inviting the people and telling them to bring others in, but it was pretty full because he was a very popular mayor. He had just been re-elected for the 3rd time, and so he was well established. And he came the first meeting, and he had a plaque to give to me from the city, and he also gave a welcome to all the people there and to us and so on. So we were very fascinating by this opportunity. Well, but there was a click up. Not the first day that we would bring someone from the little Adventist group to have special music, whether it was a singer or a duet or some musician violin or something like that. But on the Friday, would you believe it? The man, the brother-in-law of the mayor, he bought a group of 8 young ladies, probably late teenagers and early 20s. And they were going to give the music. What could we do? I'm praying so hard. And you know, these young ladies got up. They didn't have rock music or anything like that. They had this marching kind of things in formation. They did it very well, but it wasn't what we wanted on Sabbath. But you know, God has a way sometimes to take a bad situation and bring it to good. Well, these young ladies hadn't been coming. They were all German Baptists. They stayed for the meeting. And they came to talk to us. And they said, we want you to come to our campsite. The Baptists, German Baptists had their own campsite about 25 kilometres away from the city. And we've got a meeting together. There'll be about 60 of us there tomorrow afternoon. Could you come and talk to our young people? Well, by God's grace, we had 2 meetings in the morning with Adventist groups. And in the evening we had the meeting again, but we did have a spot in the afternoon. God works things out that you don't know. And so we went up there. Oh, they were running around, and beautiful swimming pool, though they weren't in the swimming pool. But soon the leaders got them all together, and what attention that I got for those 60. And I taught how to be a moral Christian. That was my topic. How to be a moral Christian. That's a very important topic. And, well, I could see that I got the attention of the young people. And then I realised that night I was going to talk to the people down in the city hall, dealing with the issue of parents, how to train their children to be true Christians. And I said to the young people, how to get their children to marry true Christians. So as I finished my talk, I said, young people, I know tonight this is your swimming night and you're looking forward to it. But I want you to consider coming down tonight and listen to the topic and how to choose a Christian spouse. Almost everyone came down. I mean, we had to pack them in because it was already comfortably full every night, this town hall. But to put another 50 or 60 young people to get squeezed in, but young people are easier to squeeze in than old people, and they all came. And look, after it, I couldn't get away from those young people after the meeting. You know, I found in South America, always the adults let the young people go to the speaker before they do. And it's a good idea. Young people need to get first opportunity. That happened to me elsewhere. I don't know whether it's in all countries of South America, but I did it where I've been. So eventually I had this stream coming with all their questions and so on, and sometimes in groups of 3 or 5 or even 1 or 2 of about 10 or something like that. And then the adults didn't take so long because it was getting late at night. But as I was looking over here, on that side of me, and there was a young woman, and she was stand apart. I knew she wanted to talk to me with no one else to hear. You understand? It was obvious to me. She didn't want to talk in front of other people. But eventually, the last one had gone, and she quickly came to me. And she said, why I didn't come earlier is because I wanted to talk to you alone. I found out she was 23 years of age. She had just completed her 3-year training, teaching of English. And she was to start a few weeks later to be, for her first year, as an English teacher. Now, I found out in Argentina, they only took Britishers to train them. They wanted British English. When I went to China, they wanted American English. Interesting. But that's how I found it in those two countries anyway. And she had been trained tremendously. She had an excellent vocabulary. She was going to have a very good start, I'm sure, on her teaching career. But she said, I wanted you to pray for me alone. And she said, I want you to pray for me because I want to find a husband like the man you described tonight. Very sincere. You know, your heart goes out to, oh, what a fine young lady. Clearly she was very a Christian. So that was a great blessing. And I had the opportunity of going to the old person's home, the nursing home. And the manager of that was the brother of the mayor, my brother-in-law. And he took me all around. There are only 27 in that nursing home. But we came to one woman, and she was so old, bedridden, but she had a wonderful countenance. She was 97 years of age. And so I knelt down beside her bed, as I was doing with others, and praying for this old woman. But she seemed a woman apart from the others. But it wasn't that they were not pleased to have someone coming visiting them and that, but this woman just shone out. When I'd gone through, he said, I forgot to tell you, she's a Seventh-day Adventist, because I'd explained that I tell you, this woman, if she won't be in the heaven, and he said, you don't know what a gem this woman is. Isn't it wonderful? An old woman, very old woman. And then he took me to the orphanage. They had 14 children in the orphanage. And one lad was there was something wrong with him mentally. They had to put him away because he'll just bash into the other children and so on. Very sad situation. And I tried to calm him down and a little bit, but he just wanted to be rough and all the time, and the younger children in there. But I tell you, when I got amongst the other children, they'd come and hang on to you as if they wanted you to be their father, or, they were doing a good job for the elderly and the orphans there. So that was good, those areas. Well, also I had an invitation to preach in a Ukrainian Baptist church. Probably most of the German had come from Ukraine anyway, because Catherine the Great, you might know in your history, in the 18th century, Catherine the Great brought many Germans over to Ukraine because she knew that they worked hard, the Germans worked hard. But later, of course, in the Soviet Union and those places, what a difference it was, even under some of the later czars. And so they'd fled down to Argentina. And I spoke in this Ukrainian church. It was one of those churches that did not have any instrument in the church. That's how conservative they were. But I tell you, when you heard the singing, it was like one of the most wonderful choir you could ever miss to meet. Beautiful harmony, these conservative. But they didn't show quite the same expression as the German Baptists had done, and so on. And that happens sometimes. They weren't a problem, of course, or they didn't have objections. Well, I went on then to Uruguay. Now, Uruguay is the most secular of all the nations of South America. Only about 30% go to church. Now, that's very low in Latin America, I can assure you. And it's known as the most secular. But I'd been invited there by a man who is a high official in the Congress there, not an elected, but one that does very high up in the Congress. And he gave me the opportunity. I was able to talk with congressmen. I could talk with the senators. Had good response from them. Wonderful men. Not most of them, but quite a few of them. And it was a blessing, a great blessing. But also, he had gotten me to speak in a Pentecostal church. Couldn't get the Adventists. Oh, I said, I've never spoken in a Pentecostal church. I tell you, I didn't know whether to say yes or no. But I said, you've got to take the gospel to all the world. They won't get any Pentecostalism from me. So the Sunday came. And we drove, of course, in this man's car to within probably 200 yards from the church. When we got out, I said, I don't feel like going there. There's music, and it was blaring away all over the community. And then I said, we're going to have a special prayer. We prayed before we left to go to the place. I said, Lord, if you want me to preach to these Pentecostals today, please stop that music so that the Holy Spirit can get through to these people. Well, it's clean. I walk into the church. Oh, it was even worse. Here was all these jump ups on these little keyboards, jumping up on them and bouncing around them and playing these other instruments all around. And in the front was the pastor's wife, a very fat woman, actually, and she just had heart surgery, and she's jumping around. I couldn't believe it. I wondered if she'd go and drop dead. And his daughter on the front, jumping around all over the place. Another prayer. Lord, I asked you to do something. I can't preach. I can't concentrate. I can't bring a real message to them. But you know, the moment I went to the pulpit, silence. God worked the miracle. And never were there what you'd expect in a Pentecostal church. They seemed to grasp the issue. The pastor was very nice pastor. Probably in his late 40s, I'd say. But of course, you know what it's like in Pentecostal churches. A lot of young people in the church. Lots of them. I wish we had our young people as on fire for what they believe. And this is what it was in Uruguay. And I got through without one of their hallelujahs, jump ups, or, you know, the usual things that go on. I don't know it too well, but I've got a pretty good idea of what it is. And after it was over, I spoke on the everlasting gospel, as I had done down in Argentina. The young people just almost too close for these. And again, the older people are standing back behind them. For about an hour and a half, I was with those young people. They said, we've never heard of the everlasting gospel. Of course. They were interested, these young people. We need, but I only had the one sermon. And there, again. Oh, what can we do? But while I'm doing that, the pastor and his wife are across the street because they're parts in they were standing there. I didn't know what to expect from them because he'd listened to the sermon too. And I wondered if he thought that I'm preaching something that I know nothing about and maybe not what I wanted to preach. He didn't tell me what to preach. Well, eventually, I walked across and the pastor said, I was greatly blessed. He said, I want you to come back next year and preach again in my church. It's amazing what God can do because we've got to go to the Pentecostals. We've got to take the gospel to every creature, you see. But you need to pray hard about it. Well, I said, well, I'll try to come back next year. That was this year, of course. And so, again, I went down to Argentina. And between them, I've squeezed in only one message in Brazil on the way between them and Uruguay. But I've spent many times in Brazil before, but not in the Pentecostal or those kind of things. So this year, I went there, but he now gave me 2 sermons to preach. So the first I taught was the seal of God, because I want to get closer to the Sabbath. And come out and show that the Sabbath is the seal of God. And then the second time, I took up, straight up, the Sabbath from the Old Testament and why it was not changed in the New Testament, and how the apostles preached in the synagogues on Sabbath, how when Paul was there in Antioch in Pisidia, where the pagans had come and said, teach us next Sabbath what you taught to the Jews today. He didn't say Sunday, they said the next Sabbath. And it's repeated. And I went through Thessalonica and Corinth, similar things where they were taken into the temple and into the synagogue and so on. And so it was getting very close. And as the second time I was there, the pastor was sitting in the congregation about 4 seats back from where I was preaching. And part way through, he was going, a yes gesture. Oh, coming. That pastor. And when I finished fully on the Sabbath, there is no way that Sunday can be the Sabbath. I was as plain as I could make it. And he got up to the front. He said, church, this is my translator, of course. He was a Brazilian, Portuguese speaking, but he spoke excellent Spanish also. And he said, church, there's something wrong in our church. We've got to come together and study these things together. We can't just stay as we are. He was deeply convicted. I'm planning, God willing, to go back to South America next year if I can, and put more time away in these places. Well, anyway, but I also went into the Congress, but this time I got more access. I spoke to the team of psychologists in the Congress. A woman was the leader of it, and there was a team of 5 psychologists, two males, 3 females. And they were to keep the mental health, not only the Congress, but the workers in the Congress and their families. And so she was very interested in what I said to them. If it's anything, it's a Catholic country, but I mean, it's more secular. But I spoke to them, and especially to her, I said, when you are dealing with the families, do you train them in prenatal care, psychological care. She said, I've never thought about that. So I talk about the food of the mother. I talked about the calmness of the mother and the husband to make sure that the wife isn't being irritated by what he's doing and so on. You need to get the congressmen men or those working here and their wives together so that they can have excellent children, calm and so on. She was quite impressed. Why haven't I thought about that? That's important. The opportunity to get into these places is not difficult. And then I had the opportunity also to talk some of the what do they call them anyway? It's a UNA, the two leaders in Uruguay. What a nice opportunity it was to talk to them. It wasn't as well as it went, because I asked them what kind of freedom. These are the freedom of nations, because going back in Uruguay it was a terrible dictatorship. But it's been free from that for about 40 or 50 years ago. And they're determined not to go back into a dictatorship. And I'd talked to one of the congressmen, a very distinguished one. His father was assassinated. He'd been there and then he fled down to Argentina, but they traced him down and shot him in Argentina, his father. And he was very important to have freedom, religious freedom and political freedom in the nation. And got on well with him. Well, this time again, there are other things new things happened in Argentina. I was called back for these young people again. Would I speak to them again? And I said, how to be a worker for God. Preached, every one of us must be a worker for God. Another wonderful response from these people, including the one that was the leader, that lady that I'd known the year before. We had another wonderful time with them. And then I got 2 more times to go to the Ukrainian church. This one that I thought didn't take much notice of what I said. I mean, I don't know if they didn't give any indications. And they had told another Ukrainian Baptist church that you should get him. And I was to preach at that new one before the one I'd been last year. And so I went to that church. But they had instruments in their church. So they're a little different. But the minister was very, very appreciative. He said, and so I said, I'm sorry, I'm going after tomorrow. So I went, and so I had that opportunity. And I preached then to the seal of God. And he said, I wish you had another night for me. Well, would you believe it? God arranged that. It poured all day the next day. I really mean tropical storms. I don't know. you could have. And the church, the other church was at low level and it was flooded out. And I couldn't preach there. And he knew it, so he called me up. You can't come. Would you please come back and give a second message tonight? And I'm going to invite those from the other church not to go, to preach, come to the preaching here. I said that would be great. And there was well over another half of what they had before the night afterwards. And I preached again straight on the Sabbath. I tell you, these people are open to the message. And he was also very interested when I mentioned the health message. Well, I said, this man, this Argentinian self-supporting worker, by the way, he'd been elevated to be the treasurer of the city. The previous treasurer couldn't give documentation of where the money had gone. They didn't say that he had embezzled. They said he's incompetent. They didn't want to go through all that. And so he chose, because he told me, the mayor told me what a wonderful man this Adventist was. Isn't it wonderful if you've got good situations like that? And the mayor chose him because he trusted him. I tell you. But I didn't see the mayor the second time because all the mayors of Argentina were in conference the very week I was there, you see. I was given the opportunity of speaking for an hour and a half with the students in a high school there. Now that wouldn't be allowed in the United States. And the principal came to me afterwards, please, if you're coming back next year, I can give you more time if I get opportunity. I tell you, the world's a field. I love it. What a joy. God has got wonderful opportunities that you have. A very serious situation. The car driver that picked us up for the mayor from the airport, this time it was 10 hours away. He came both ways twice. 10 hours each way. Unbelievable. 40 hours taking us to and from the air. That's how good the mayor was to us. But I got a phone call from him, and he said, I got a friend of mine, and he's in great trouble with his family. Would you help him? Well, I'll do what I can. So I went to see this man. He was the #1 photographer and videographer in the region. Quite a wealthy man. When I got to his place, very attractive and large home that he had. But he had found a wife up in Montreal. A woman that was a hostess in one of the top hotels in the city, and they married, and they have a son, he'd be 7 now, but he was nearly 7 when I was down there, and a lovely lad, but they were separated at that point, and she had an affair, and she was pregnant, but he still loved her. Will you go and talk to my wife? Well, course, I would never go on my own in those circumstances. But I had a good comfort there. And I could see she was a beautiful woman. And she was 40. I thought she'd be in the second half of 20. Literally. No wonder she was as successful and probably had all these offers by these fellows. But she said she was truly, really in love with her husband, and I don't know what to do. What am I going to do with... She refused to have abortion, and she also believed, but she would consider adoption. And she'd go back to Colombia, her home country. That's what happened. And I don't know what the results are now. But I tell you, when you're travelling around, you get all sorts of things that you have no idea to do. But God bless us in every way. And if the Lord has strengthened me enough by then, I will go back next year. I've got work to finish. Work to finish. I had good talks with the union president of Uruguay, the union. He would have loved for me to preach, but the division had said no. That's it. And he was a Peruvian. I think they brought him down from Peru because there's so many Adventists in Peru, and they bring in the numbers. They wanted someone from Peru that could get much more growth in Uruguay. I don't know whether that's worked or not, but that's what they had to do. But one last thing. I went to one of the congressmen. Oh, he was an aristocratic-looking man. And he spoke with such power. I tell you, I can imagine his speeches on the floor and that, and I was taken to him. And so I was talking about different things, asking him questions, and he was very happy to answer the questions. I said, how's Christianity doing here? Well, he said, it's not going very well. And part of the problem are the standard of Christianity. He said, I'm a Roman Catholic, but I'm ashamed of my church. Or something, wasn't it? And I said, what about the evangelicals? Because I'd seen quite a few evangelical churches. He said, they're as bad as the Catholics. That's what he said. There's only 2 good churches here in Uruguay. One is a Methodist church and the other is the Seventh-day Adventist. Well, then I told him I was a Seventh-day Adventist. Oh, you're the man I want to meet. He said, I want to get to your leader and tell him how to get many more converts to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Here is a politician, a Roman Catholic politician, wanting to tell the union president. And he said, the Mormons, he wasn't favourable to them, but he said, they have the best way. Knock on the doors. He said they go one door at a time, and probably only one of them become Mormons, but they keep going. And it's now the fastest growing church in Uruguay. He said, tell your leader. Instead, I should talk to him personally to tell him. I said, well, there's been 14 crusades this year. Yes, that's all right. But no, you go door to door. Does that have any thing that you remember in the spirit of prophecy? That way to go door to door. He had a great respect for them, for the poor and for the needy and so on, but you could get many more Seventh-day Adventists here if you go door to door. Well, I gave him the telephone to the president because he'd given me his card, and I wrote, because the next day I was leaving, I couldn't get to him. I let him know that I'd told this congressman that he would like to talk to him. I wonder if they've got together. It'd be interesting. The union president was a very nice man, and I think a very basic Adventist. But he knew that there were problems in the church there in Uruguay. Well, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel. That's what God says. No, it's not said. That's a command for each one of us. Dear brethren and sisters, oh, how wonderful. If every Seventh-day Adventist was a soul-winning man or woman, if he feels he can't speak through the literature work or, you tracts and all, we have to know. Because, as I've told here at Gazeley, that my grandmother was converted by a 17-year-old young man putting tracts in her letterbox. And she wanted to know who he was. So she stayed up the night when he must put it in each week, because it was always the same morning that she found them. So someone was putting it in under the light of the gas lights that they had in those days in the street in Newcastle. And when he came to the gate, the letterbox was on. She quickly came down and she told him, I just wanted to see who it was because I love these tracts. And he said, well, would you like a lady to come and study the Bible with you? My grandmother was 28 at that time. She'd had the 6 children, but 2 had died. And she, as I said, was 28 years of age. But eventually she came to the Sabbath. And that's why. Because a lad of 17. When I was a boy, at the Bullaroo Church, a little one outside of Newcastle, he came to our church, this man. And he was then the secretary of the conference, the North New South Wales conference. And Mother whispered to us, this is the man that put the tract in Grandma's, because Mother had told us about the story. I couldn't stop listening to him. I couldn't take my eyes off him, what he had done to bring my grandmother to the 7th day. He was, of course, a mature, middle-aged man when I saw him. I can't remember what he preached, but I can remember seeing him, even now, his face. God's going to bring souls for the kingdom if we're sincere enough, earnest enough, take every opportunity that we can. God's going to finish this work. If it's not with you, He's going to do it with others. This nation is going to be fully given the opportunity anyway. Oh, how good it is to be servants of God in the kingdom. God bless you, and let us pray together. Dear Father in heaven, we surely are on the brink of eternity. Oh Lord, help us to understand the calling that you've given to each one of us, no matter how young or how old. Oh Lord, bless every soul that's been here today, that you will guide and strengthen and uphold in a wonderful way. God is looking at each one, and there is a perfect record of each one of us in the kingdom. Is there any sin tainting our record, or has Christ taken away and blotted out the sins during the time that we are in now? Oh Lord, what a tragedy would be because of our lack of earnestness that other souls will be lost for the kingdom. We pray for our boys and girls, our children, our youth. Oh, Satan is doing everything he can to destroy the youth of this world. But Lord, take charge. Bring them to thy grace. May every member of the church have a burden for the children and for the youth. And even if we see the youth going in a wrong direction, let us not let them go, because it may be one of us that will be able to turn them in the right direction and be a help to the parents in their efforts to bring their children for the kingdom of heaven. And may, in the near days, there will be the climax of this earth's history. And the day will come when there will never be any sin or any taint in the universe, where we can live in peace and happiness and joy and in goodness throughout eternity. In Jesus' name, amen.